Hi, everybody. This is Brian from Gurufi. Today, we're going to be talking about some personal statement stuff. But before we get started, I always like to know where people are in the world. So if you, on my computer, it's on the right-hand side, there's a comments function. So drop me a note. Let me know where you're at in the world, and also maybe a little bit something about where you are in your application process, the schools that you're thinking about, and any kind of concerns that you might have. But let's start off with just where you are. And also, I'm going to have a dedicated Q&A section at the end if anyone has questions, but please use the comment section along the way to let me know if there's anything that's not really clear, or you want me to expound on further, or if anything I say kind of sparks your interest and you want to know a little bit more about it in terms of building out your personal statement. All right. So like I said, I'm Brian Fobi. I'm the CEO of Gurufi. We're a company that handles exclusively personal statements. We work every year with a lot of applicants to top MBA programs. Last year, through the 2021 cycles, we had a lot of success with our clients. Stanford, GSB, Wharton, HBS, that's Harvard Business School, INSEAD, Oxford Syed, Stern, Anderson. The folks we worked with had a lot of success. And obviously, humility requires that I point out that that's mostly a function of, what they did. And it's, on us to find ways to make that pop. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Now, when I was thinking about how to conceptualize and how to deliver this message of how to write a personal statement that's interesting, but is also substantive. There's a saying in America, some people say it's not the steak, it's the sizzle, right? So when people are trying to sell you something, they'll talk about the steak has to have sizzle. And the idea is that, there's this dichotomy between substance and flash, right? That there's the steak, which is like your proteins, what you're eating, and then there's the sizzle, right? If you're a person who likes steak, when they bring it out, or whatever the meat is, if it's it's got the juices popping and it's on a hot plate, that excites your appetite. And there's some there's a bit of salesmanship that goes into writing a personal statement. That is, you are selling yourself, and you're putting out an honest, right? An honest, but also an interesting and the best version of yourself. And so you do want to make sure that your steak, so to speak, has a little bit of sizzle. And today, what I'm going to talk about is how you can balance those two things, making sure that you have a really substantive and interesting personal statement at the same time. All right. All right. So like I said, CEO of Gurufi, we focus exclusively on personal statements and CVs. Whether you have a draft and you can come to us to work it and revise it, or if you don't know where to start, we can help you through that process. All right. So to start with, what's the stake? And, I'm going to abuse this metaphor. I'm going to beat it into the ground. But the stake, as I like to think about it, is the stuff that your personal statement has to have. It is the essential part of what the personal statement needs to convey. All right. So every personal statement has to have a clear why. All right. So when I read your essay, I understand why you want to get an MBA, why you want to do it right now. If any of you guys listen to the podcast that I do in conjunction with GMAT Club, I talk to people, representatives from schools, business schools around the world. And one of the things that I'll always ask representatives and also applicants who come on the show as well is to say, one of the interesting and different things about an MBA is that of all the professional degrees, it's the only one that, strictly speaking, is not required. And what do I mean by that? If you want to become a lawyer, you have to go to law school, right? If you want to become a doctor, you have to go to medical school. I can't just say, oh, I'm going to be a doctor because I like healing people and then hang out a shingle. No, I'll get arrested. You have to go through this process. Most businessmen don't have MBAs. And so this, sort of puts to the forefront why. All right. So your personal statement has to answer that question. At the end of the essay, I need to know why you want to get an MBA. All right. And also why right now. What about your life and your intended trajectory makes this the ideal moment for you to get an MBA? Second, you have to have a concrete and simple vision for your future. All right. Now, I like to think about this in terms of the old elevator test, right? So, you're in the business world, this idea that you get on an elevator, and if I were to ask you, what do you want for your future? And the door closes on the first floor, and we're going to the third floor. By the time the door opens on the third floor, I should know, right? And the idea is here that, if you can't explain what you want to do and become in a few sentences, ideally one sentence, to be honest, then you probably need to sharpen and clarify that. And so, when I talk about having a concrete and simple vision for your future, that's what it means. You can tell me exactly what you plan to do and plan to become. And lastly, a personal statement has to have evidence of ability or potential. And what this is just a lengthy way of saying you've got to talk about your experiences. And I'll speak on this at the end of this presentation a little bit more. But if you say that you want to do something, it has to make sense within the context of what you have already done. All right. So if I want to, work in, let's say, I want to do fintech. All right. But I have no math background. I have no background in finance. Then me saying that in a personal statement is a little unusual because it doesn't make sense given my trajectory to this point. All right. So I don't have stories where I can tell you that I've either worked in this field or I've worked in an adjacent field and I've seen its potential. If I don't have those things, what I tell you um, will not really resonate with you as something that is legitimate because I'm just talking about pie in the sky. I'm talking about, something that doesn't seem like it could actually happen based on what I've done. All right. So that's the stake. What is the sizzle? All right. Your personal statement needs to convey a sense of passion. All right. You are excited about the thing that you aspire to do. You devote energy to it. You've demonstrated that in the face of setbacks that you just keep going. That it's not just a job. It's a career or an avocation. It's something that you're excited about. Um, it also should have a sense of justified self-belief. I'm not talking about cockiness where, you open your essay by saying, I'm the best fintech guy on Wall Street and, everyone else can suck eggs. No, that's not what we're talking about. Justified self-belief is, again, where you say, I think I know I can do these things because I have done these other things in the past. All right. And so you're using experiences and accomplishments specifically to speak about what you believe and what you aspire to do. And lastly, is what I like to call the three L's. That's leadership, learning, and loss. Now, your essay doesn't have to have all of these things, but it can be really helpful to have one or more of them. So, leadership is within the context and within the structure of your essay, you talk about instances where you demonstrated leadership, right? Learning can be where you encountered something and either you had to adjust and evolve in order to overcome it or to solve it. Or sometimes it's also a story where you encountered something and it didn't go well, but in the aftermath of it, you began to understand your own personal shortcomings, and that also speaks to the third point, which is loss. Uh, you know, a lot of times applicants will believe that their personal statements just need to be lists of home runs, right? Everything that they've done where they were just amazing and they knocked it out of the park. That's really not quite true. Moments of loss, moments of failure, moments where you genuinely tried your best but it didn't go well, those are also opportunities for self-reflection. And so, if you have those things, you can include them as ways of infusing your essay with a kind of human element so that a person reads your essay and says, okay, uh, you know, Sandra tried to build this company. It didn't work. And it failed in these particular ways, went out of business, whatever. Um, And in the aftermath of that, she had to have a frank conversation with herself about why it failed and to take ownership of it. And then she realized that I don't understand these things and I need to get better at X, Y, and Z. All right. Those things, they infuse your essay with a sense of humanity. And that's accessible. And when paired with kind of the substantive things about what you have accomplished and what you aspire to do, it can provide a nice sense of balance, and you become a more three-dimensional and full and real person, um, through the use of these what I call the three L's: leadership, learning, and loss. All right, now the main thing that I want you to understand from this is that, with these two concepts, again, it's a little bit cheesy, but let's go with me here, right? That you should reject this binary between the steak and the sizzle. That you either write a very analytical and serious essay, or you write one that's very emotional, human, and touchy feely. You should seek to find a balance. All right. Now, some people will naturally kind of drift more to one side than the other. Some business schools will certainly, favor one side of that uh, or the other. Right. So, there famously a lot of some particular business schools that are much more kind of quant heavy. Right. Your essay is going to have a little bit more of a tilt than towards the analytical side. But it's also the case that all business schools care about both sides. All right. So even if you're talking about kind of a more strictly quantitative approach to the direction that you want your career to take, there is a story from your past about how it is that you came to this. What is interesting about this field? Uh, what were the moments where you demonstrated that you had the requisite skills to thrive within that field? Right? Those are all stories and examples that you can demonstrate, so that even if your essay says, look, here's this really complicated um, quantitative thing that I want to do, um, you know it's still the case that I have a story that explains my trajectory and will give you a sense of believability when I talk about the future that I aspire to build. All right. So let's first kind of talk about the two forms of essays that I often see that are flawed in one respect or another. So the first is what I call the essay that has steak but no sizzle. All right. Now, the first mistake I think that people make is they focus too much on the basic beats of their biography. Obviously, if you're telling stories about yourself, there is a biographical element. A personal statement is, you know, by definition, it is a deeply biographical exercise. You are writing about yourself, but this is not a CV that you just put in a narrative form. And a lot of times, you'll get an essay and say, let's say it's an essay that is 700 words, right? So kind of split down the middle of what a normal, um, you know, schools tend to have caps somewhere between 500 and 1,000 words. Um, what you don't want is to try within the tight confines of a 700 word or 1,000 word essay tell 8 different stories, right? So you say, okay, here's the 3 things I did at university. Here's the 4 things I did at work, and here's the 6 clubs I want to join, and here's the 3 extracurricular things I've also done along the way. The personal statement needs to be much more about depth than breadth. And if you end up trying to explain too many things, what you will end up doing is diluting the stories that you tell. You tilt too much towards having a list and not actually having a narrative. And you want to make sure that you do have a story and a narrative. And so, understand that your application has lots of different parts to it. And most applications, you're going to submit a CV. Many applications will also have short stories or kind of more specific questions. There's also an interview element sometimes. And so think about, say, like, I know that there are these other things that I can show uh, in other parts of my application. So I don't need to stuff them into this essay, because it will simply dilute the power of what I'm trying to convey. And instead focus on just a couple of moments where you can go in depth, because deeply analyzing a few moments is so much more powerful than having a list of things that you go over. All right. So just to quickly pause, Francesca asks, do you believe essays, GMAT scores, and work experiences can make up for a lower GPA? The short answer is yes. So, every applicant comes to this process, the admissions process, with their own unique profile. And someone who has, maybe struggled academically a little bit in college, but they left, found themselves, had some professional success. It's very, very common. I see it all the time, especially like if your poorer grades were in the first, say, year or two of college, then there's a narrative that you can construct from that. Business schools understand that 18 and 19-year-olds, God bless them, but they're not always the most mature and ready for college. And so the profile of, Johnny shows up at UCLA, um, gets a 2.7 GPA his freshman year. Um, I've worked with applicants who've gotten significantly lower than that in their freshman years. Sometimes have even left school and then come back. There's a way in which you say, look, 19-year-old me is not 27-year-old me. That guy was an idiot. He was, you don't say that in your essay, but you say, look, he wasn't ready. He wasn't mature. I own the mistakes that I made when I was 19, but here are the things that I've done since that demonstrate my capacity to excel. I went back to school, and in my junior and senior years, I got a 4.0. I really killed it on the GMAT. Since I've worked at Procter and Gamble, I've gotten these promotions and these, excellent reviews on my work, and I've sought out additional experiences that demonstrate that I'm not that person I was at 19. Most business schools will take a holistic look. Okay. And so early stumbles will not sink you. The thing you have to think about, though, is how you frame those early struggles in a way within your essay that explain it. Don't make excuses for it, but explain it. So you say, you own it, right? Say, here's what happened. Here's the mistakes that I made. Importantly, it's kind of the important part. Here is how I've addressed those shortcomings. And here are examples subsequent to that where I've shown that this is no longer an issue. All right. And if you can do that, you can mitigate some of those things. Now, obviously, a lot of times it's usually better to have a much higher GPA, but it's not going to sink your application. These things are holistic, and within certain ranges, you can still have a lot of success. All right. Let me get to these next couple of questions in a second. Let me finish this slide, and then I see there's a couple more questions. I'll get to them. All right. So in terms of the steak with no sizzle, the second point I want to make, kind of in relation to what I was just talking about, is if your essay doesn't have any insight or thought or self-reflection about the moments of challenge that you faced. And so if your essay is just, I was given this very difficult work assignment, I solved it, I killed it, it was awesome, and I moved on to the next thing, that doesn't show any real depth. I would much rather read an essay where someone talked in depth about one problem that they faced in a professional circumstance, where they talked about, look, here's how I felt I wasn't ready for it. Here's how I had to evolve. Here's the skills that I had to draw upon in order to solve that. That's way better than just, hey, man, I'm awesome. I was faced with this challenge. I killed it. I faced with this challenge. I killed it. I killed it. I killed it. Okay. Fine. That's not a very compelling thing, and it doesn't show a sense of self-reflection. The third point I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, but I want to touch on it now because it's really important. If your essay doesn't really show you interacting or collaborating with others, that's something to think about, because that's something that helps to draw out the personal side of you. Is what are your relationships like within educational and professional and other settings? Another thing to be concerned about is don't fuss too much about the minutia of deals or projects that you worked on. You do want to describe them sufficiently, but I'll often get an essay where someone will spend 150 words just describing in granular detail the technical challenges that something faced. And it's like, we had to work through the logistics with Samsung and get this XYZ problem solved. It's like, no, that is a level of weeds that I wouldn't put in this essay unless the essay is specifically one with a prompt that tells you, please describe a work challenge that you had and how you went through it. Um, Going into too much depth is one, it's often kind of boring. Two, it often lures you into using jargon and terms that are often company specific that the reader might not understand. And second, it kind of misses the point. I don't want to know about, every single number and technical glitch you fixed. What I want to know is, like, kind of what was the basic nature of the challenge, and what did it call upon you uh, to pull from yourself in order to solve it. All right. Think about it in terms of big picture, like the challenge that you faced and what you overcame. Similarly, don't make your essay just a list of accomplishments and awards. As a general matter, I would say, unless it's something huge like the Nobel Prize or the Heisman Trophy or something, um, keep the list of accomplishments and awards in your CV. Don't put those in the personal statement. It's not really a great place for it. A good rule of thumb about whether or not something goes in the CV versus your personal statement is it should stay in your CV if all you're doing is listing it as opposed to describing it and going into depth. All right. Again, personal statements are about depth, not breadth. You want to cover a few things really well as opposed to a bunch of stuff really lightly. If you don't do these things on like the sizzle side of things, what you've done is you've missed an opportunity to introduce yourself as a person. Okay. You need to find ways to emerge and to kind of pop out as something more than just your CV. And it's almost like when if you get an interview, you kind of want it so that when you sit down or you Zoom with the interviewer, they kind of feel like they know you already. They understand your values and your struggles and your aspirations. And if you do that, that's a much more effective essay than, you know, uh, Sally has these 15 things that she accomplished in these 4 awards. Like, okay, fine. Like, I got that from your CV. You've wasted this opportunity on your personal statement. All right. I want to take a quick beat to answer some of these questions. I had a traumatic event as a child and teen, which led to mental and physical health issues, which in turn impacted my career. Um, how should I talk about it? All right. So, how you talk about it sort of depends on where you are in the process. So, if this is a very recent thing, it's honestly going to be a little bit more difficult to deal with, in the sense that what you want to do anytime you're talking about a struggle that you face in of any kind, is you want to, you know, explain it, pardon me, contextualize it, but also demonstrate like how you've grown since. There's this great quote from Hemingway who said, the world breaks us all, and some of us are stronger in the broken places. Um, what you want to do is find ways to show how you're stronger in the broken places. Life is hard. And on a personal level, and I know this from many admissions people, they do respect when people can talk about the difficulties they faced. But it's also the case that what you don't want is, to present a picture, whether accurate or not, that you arrive as kind of a still broken person. And I know I'm not happy with how I just phrased that. It's a bit clumsy, but that's the idea of what you want to avoid. You want to find ways to say, okay, here's the hardships. Yeah, it broke me, but I am stronger in the broken place. Okay. And that's how I think about it. And so it helps to have a little bit of distance. And I'm not talking 15 years or anything like that. It's just enough time so you can say, here's what I learned from it. And more important, if you can then provide examples subsequent to that of how you've moved past it and how you've used those difficult times and those setbacks in order to become better. All right. Um, so, what if, on the contrary, you have good grades and experiences, but the GMAT score is low? So, one, this is sort of school dependent, right? But it's also the case that, again, this is a holistic thing, that there's different buckets. And so that if your grades and your professional experiences and you get great letters of recommendation and your personal statement is really strong, um, those things will buy you leeway in another area, right? That's just the way to think about it. When you say no insights into what you thought, do you mean we need to elaborate the takeaways from the experience and how we dealt with it? Yeah. So Slade is asking, yeah, it's self reflection is what I'm talking about. Is that you face something. Let's say you faced a difficult, challenge at work, a new responsibility at work. So just to pull something from the ether. Let's say that for the first time you were required to lead a large team. You'd never done that before, and you weren't sure how to do it. So you say, "Oh, okay. Like, what does this require of me?" You might even ask, "Am I able to do this?" Self doubt is fine. You can explore self doubt a little bit within the context of a personal statement, but again, you want to do it in a way that says self doubt is where you started, but you earned the confidence through hard work and success, um, to show that, like, yeah, self doubt is a fine place to start as long as you then couple that with action. So, I want to know a little bit about the interior world. And again, don't go on about, like, don't give me 2 paragraphs with your interior monologue about the challenge that you face, but give the reader a little bit of insight. What scared you? Um, et cetera, et cetera. You know, um, some schools don't require personal statements; they just give prompts, which you respond to. Yeah, that's still a personal statement, right? You're always talking about yourself for the most part, and so whether or not so for example, if the prompt is something, like, I think Stanford's is like, what's the most important thing to you, what do you value most in the world? um that's still a personal statement, right? It's not kind of the free form where you can kind of begin and end where you want and take it in the direction that you want. You're still responding to something very specific, but it's a personal statement, and you should view it as your opportunity to tell your story. It tells the story in that instance. It's kind of centered on your values and what you care about. But again, these are personal statements. I wouldn't get too caught up in the nomenclature about exactly what these things are labeled. Um, Let me. I think there's a couple more. Da-da-da. Oh, we got some spammers that were blocked. That's fine. All right. So that's the example of what happens. I think I've answered all the questions there. This is, when you have a steak with no sizzle. All right. Now I want to say something quickly about the opposite problem, which is when you have sizzle and no steak. Um, this is where someone tries to, have an over the top emotional, I'm going to, real, um, a real humdinger of an essay. I kind of think that the best essays are kind of written from like a stance of like calm confidence, right? You're not trying to impress me like um over the top. So don't feel the need to have these emotional stories just because, right? All the time I will work with clients. I say, "Why did you include this story?" I said, "Oh, it's a great hook. It'll engage the reader." It's like, "Yeah, but it doesn't have, like, you open with the story, a sad story about how, say, your grandmother died when you were 7. All right. But how does this, connect to what you talk about the rest of the essay, where you want to get into fintech, right? So, well, it doesn't really, but I wanted to hook. It's like, well, if it's an emotional story just for its own sake, it doesn't advance your essay. That's sizzle with no steak. Okay. Kind of a down on the ground tip here is adjectives and adverbs. Usually you can cut most of them. Don't look to just, throw every fancy word that you can at an essay just because you think that's what good writing is. No, good writing is simple and clear. Most of what revision is figuring out what you need to eliminate in order to make the essay really go smoothly and fluid. Okay. And lastly, kind of connected to that point, you want to make sure that you write like you talk. I'll talk a little bit about that um, later. But if this doesn't sound like you, then it's unlikely that it's coming across as authentic and like there's a real person, all right, behind the essay. It will lack 3 dimensionality. All right. So here are problems. And so how do you fix them? All right. So to start with, how do you add sizzle? All right. How do you make it interesting when you have a story that you want to tell and you just don't know how to do it well, or you have like ideas? The first thing that I would say is most healthy people underestimate how interesting they are. That everyone thinks, "Oh, I'm boring," right? With a little bit of digging, when I work with clients, I will always find, even the most boring person has a couple of things at least that are interesting about them. Okay. So the first thing I would tell you is just from an attitude and like a point of view is don't think about this in terms of like, I must be boring. You're not. All right. Um, Secondly, kind of more concretely, um, you know, people will get bogged down or they'll struggle with their personal statements when they think about it in terms of describing what they have done and what they hope to do as opposed to telling a story. People understand more intuitively the phrasing of like telling a story. And so that's how I would encourage you to think about it. Focus on storytelling. Make sure that you're the main character, that what you're describing is yourself and your past and where you want to go. You need to remain kind of a central character, sometimes by yourself, sometimes in collaboration with others, right? So either, first person singular, first person plural, they're both good. Um, but make sure you're telling stories. If you want, you can go back through the GMAT Club video archives, and I have a couple of videos where I go in depth about how you really dig in and tell a story. I'm not going to repeat too much of that here, but the basic idea, or I'll give the quick recap is almost think of your essay like more like a movie than an essay. Like, what is the main thing that you faced? What is the challenge that you had to overcome, and what is the big thing that you want to accomplish? What's your big idea? Like that's how you should think about it. If you're the hero of your personal statement, and I don't mean this in the sense that like you just crush everybody easily and you're always the smartest person in every room, but more like you're a person who's on a journey of self-discovery and that you have a goal that you're passionate about, that you're trying to get to, hero in that sense, then that's much better. That's the type of story we're talking about. Third point, we, not me. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But again, putting yourself in a social context, whether in leadership positions or within groups, can be a really useful way of making your humanity and how you think come out. And lastly, don't get bogged down. We'll talk about that. We have talked about that already a little bit, but we'll touch on it again real fast. All right, so storytelling. The best way to show what you will do, right, is to talk about what you have done. Personal statements, I say this all the time, are about the future. Um, that can seem counterintuitive because you're like, well, aren't I supposed to talk about the things I've done? Yeah. But the context is always what you hope to do, right? You're trying to get into an MBA program and then from there pursue particular professional goals that you have. So that's the context, right? That's the main thing. You're using the past as a way of explaining why and how. That is why you want to do this thing and how you can succeed in this endeavor. All right. So focus on moments of conflict and challenge, moments where a difficulty was presented to you, you encountered something hard, and how you moved past it and overcame it, what it required you to do, what it required you to know, how it required you to evolve in order to meet that challenge. Okay. What's really important is that you give the reader two things whenever you talk about a challenge. One, a clear sense of stakes. This is just a simple way of saying that the reader needs to know what would have happened if you had failed. Okay, so you get some challenge at work, or you started a company, or whatever it is, right? You've decided to try to build a club at your school, or to resuscitate a club that had kind of, been struggling. So you say, look, this is what will happen if this fails. Like this club will die, and this interest that people have won't be addressed. Or if my business fails, the two people that I brought on are going to lose jobs. If this project fails, like it's going to be a huge setback, both for my career, but also it'll harm the client and the company, right? Make it clear, like this is an important challenge because there are stakes involved. And secondly, um, make sure that the reader understands that you're a different person on the other side of a challenge than when you first started. Uh, again, in these other storytelling videos that I've done, that one of the things that I really want people to understand is that there is this sense of a journey, and who you are after the challenge is really the important thing, because the reader says that and says, "Oh, this is a person who's in the process of growing, who is always seeking ways to improve themselves." And so, if you can do that and make clear, like, look, on the other side of this challenge, I'm a much better and different person. I'm much wiser. I'm more humble. I'm a better collaborator, whatever it is. Like, figure out the way that you are better after having faced this challenge. Um, and that'll be the thing that really moves your essay. All right. Now, I also want to pause for a moment and talk about this we, not me. In so like I said before, I do these podcasts with GMAT Club, and I did one a few weeks ago with Russ Morgan, who is one of the deans of admission at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, and he was talking about what he looks for when he's reading a personal statement. And he said a thing that he cares about is seeing how many times someone says "I" versus "we," right? And schools that care about leadership, this is something that they will emphasize. Not all of them do it in the explicit way that Russ does, but they want to see you in collaborative and leadership settings. How is it that you interact with people? What is it that you care about when you are interacting with other people? So, for instance, is it really important that you position other people to excel? How do you get feedback? How do you inspire and prompt people? How do you deal with people when they aren't carrying their load, right? Putting yourself in collaborative settings will give you a sense of humanity within your essay. You're talking about your leadership style, and sometimes it can be moments where your leadership style maybe fell short, right? And you say, look, I made this mistake, that I didn't delegate with enough thought, or that I assumed everybody would be on task because I'm always on task, whatever it is. But this "we, not me," finding ways to make yourself in your essay in collaborative settings, that this is not just, a solo journey where everything you encounter you do yourself because you're always the smartest and the toughest and the baddest person in every room. That's not really a reasonable perspective, and it's also not the perspective that business schools today care about more. Collaboration and leadership aren't just buzzwords, it's things they genuinely care about. And if your essay can reflect that, then it provides a sense of three-dimensionality, and they see you as a person. And that's to use the parlance of today, that's the sizzle, right? And lastly, I talked about this a second ago, but don't get bogged down in too many details. This is another way of saying don't be boring, right? When you're describing a problem that you faced, how I like to think about it is that when you first introduce the problem, I wouldn't spend more than a sentence talking about it. You can introduce additional elements to it as you then take the reader through how you solved it, right? But this initial framing needs to be simple and clear so that the reader understands, here's this thing that you faced, here's why it was important and daunting, and then you go on to talking about how you solved it. Going too deep into numbers and technical specs, a lot of times people feel like if they give you the number, like, oh, I worked on a $4 million deal for Samsung, and they feel like the 4 million is the thing that's going to, whoa, that's amazing. That's not really quite true. A challenge that has a clear explanation and the reader understands why it was important to you, that's going to do way more in terms of impacting your reader than throwing a number out there, right? Even technical problems can be boiled down simply. And so spend your energy talking about how you solved the problem, because that's really what this is, and not so much in going into granular detail about what precisely the problem was. All right. So past and future is where sizzle meets steak. What do I mean by this? Your description of your future must align with your past. Okay. As I've said before, admissions is about the future. And so when you were describing what you hope to be and do and how business school can help you be it and do it, you need to make sure that it makes sense given the things from your past that you've talked about. All right. So I used this example earlier, but it's, if you say that you want to become, that you have this cool idea for a quantitative finance company, but nothing in your background at all is related to that, that's a tough sell. All right. That it feels empty. And admissions directors are often on the lookout for people who are trying to give them what they think they want. So you say, oh, this school really loves quant. That's the cool thing. And the people that they admit, they're mostly quant heavy, like my friend Johnny over there. So I'm going to give them that. And they'll read it and they'll say, well, that's empty. That doesn't resonate with who this applicant is. All right. So when your past aligns with your future, right, you have these kind of 2 points in your life, and it makes sense. That is a compelling story, or it is at least the basis of a compelling story about what you hope to accomplish. And so, I always think that you should start, when you're outlining or you're planning your personal statement, start with the question of, what do I aspire to become and what do I hope to do? Once you know the answer to that question, you can then work backwards and say, okay, since this is the thing that I'm selling myself as, what from my past can I pull out and emphasize and provide stories and explanation and kind of insight and depth for? That's how I choose what I write about. Okay. To the extent that they don't align, right? So let's say you don't feel like you can quite bring those things together. If the gap isn't too large, that explanatory gap, that's where you can fill in the part about, like, look, this is why I need this MBA, right? So, like, this is what my past is. This is what my future is. They don't quite link, and I need the MBA as the bridge to span that gap. That's fine, as long as it's not, so far apart that it doesn't make any sense at all. You need to find a way to tell a story where this is coherent. All right, it's a story about your future that is, like, the soil for that story, like the source of that story that your story grows out of is your past. What have you done? And if you take that approach, you'll be much more likely, to have a story that resonates with the reader and sounds compelling. Um, like I said, begin your application process by thinking about who you aspire to become. Um, if your past and your future, that is what you say you hope to do and be, doesn't align with what you have done, you will have neither the steak nor the sizzle, right? You won't have the steak because your personal statement will feel insubstantial and unlikely. That is, the person will say, this doesn't, like, how's he going to be a quant expert when he doesn't have any math classes, right? There's no steak there, right? As the old Wendy's commercial said, where's the beef, right? Similarly, if your past and future don't align, you won't have any sizzle. Your story won't make sense. It's not attractive. You're like, what is this? Why is this guy going on about this thing when he clearly doesn't have sufficient grounding in it? All right. So that's how you bring those things together. You tell stories about your past that make your future self seem likely with the aid of the thing that you're trying to get, which is the MBA. Okay. Now, to abuse this metaphor for the last time, um, in terms of garnish, right, on this meal, um, read your essay out loud, right? I mean, this literally. If you're self-conscious about it, go to the bathroom and read it in the mirror, whatever. Do it in your voice. Read it out loud. If it doesn't sound like you talk, change it. Another thing you can do is have a friend read it out loud to you. And you say, I don't talk like that. Or have your friend read it and ask them, does this sound like me? Essays that essays that fail, or essays that don't, quite feel like they have three dimensions to them, oftentimes it's because people write in a really stilted way. Like, they feel is like the personal statement language, like a lot of everything is leveraged. That's the verb that everyone wants to throw in 20 times in an essay. Follow, the old Hemingway rules about, if you don't need a word, don't use it. If you can use a simple word instead of a more complicated word, use it. Shorter sentences are better than longer sentences, especially at the first and the last part of your essay. Don't try to make this, not sound like you, right? When you do that, almost reflexively, you will infuse a bit of your personality into it, and it'll be a much better essay. Okay, so don't try to write a personal statement. Write a statement that is personal. Write an essay. Write a story that is personal, and do it in your voice. Okay. And related to that, don't feel compelled to open with fireworks or huge emotions. People always want to have, like, the big hook, the fireworks right from the start. The problem with that is that if you open with a kind of a bang, it's really hard to maintain that momentum. And what you have is huge opening and then an essay that sort of collapses into something smaller. And that's incongruous and it feels weird. All right. So, I'll open it up to questions if people have, any questions about personal statement writing process. Like I said at the start of the video, you can always check us out at gurufi.com. Whether you have a draft or you want help building your personal statement from the ground up, we can do that for you. We can help you with that. And we also have CV experts who make clear, powerful, and succinct CVs. Okay, I would love to open up the floor to comments right now or questions, if there are any questions that people have. I'll give people a second to write out their questions. All right. Well, I don't know that we have questions then. If you do have questions, like I said, you can head on over to gurufi.com and you can shoot us a message via the site. I enjoyed speaking with you guys today, and I hope that you can use these tips to write a really interesting and powerful personal statement that moves the needle on your application process. And the thing that I would just ask you to take with you is to remember that you all have stories, and okay, well, we do have questions. Do you think writing about multiple problems you faced in a 500-word essay is a good idea? You can do it. Yeah. 500 words is tight. If by multiple you mean two, the answer is yes. If it's three, you know, probably not. Three is kind of pushing it because you still want to make sure that you have an introduction that provides the framework and the theme and a conclusion that brings everything full circle. So you three is probably a bit much, but you can write about two things. Three, if you're really clean and tight, that's sort of pushing it, and it requires like a really refined writing touch. Um, okay. Hi, Brian. Is it okay to keep your story the same across multiple applications, or do some schools appreciate a certain way of writing more than others? Yeah. So let me give you three answers that in some ways all contradict each other. But this is, admissions in these things is sometimes more alchemy than anything else. So the first answer is everyone appreciates good writing. So if your writing is clear and engaging and answers the question, um, that is good. Okay. So that's the universal umbrella that I would take with it. Um, there are certain schools that have maybe an emphasis that is, so if you think about, this is really sloppy, but like if business schools are kind of more quant focused, more entrepreneurial focused, or more management focused, slash consulting focused, what they seek out in applicants will be slightly different. And so, one, if your application, um, whether it's because it's the school that you're applying to or not, is much more focused on leadership, and that you have an entrepreneurial vision and an idea for a company, then how you write about that needs to be a little bit more compelling, just in terms of like the story that you tell, because the entirety of what you're doing there is kind of the story, right? Um, Whereas if it's slightly more quant focused, it's a little bit of a different style. Um, and it's also the case, and here's where it gets fuzzy, is that just bluntly, whether it's people like me or people who provide kind of a more holistic service where you're helping you pick the schools, et cetera, et cetera. Um, the challenge is that, how do I say this? That a lot of times people will sell you on a vision of certainty that's just not there. Having been on the admission side of things, I know that a lot of times it just comes down to a single person, right? Like, and you don't know who that person is. Um, it's what is this person's tastes. It'll oftentimes come down to like what is the class that they want to build and who do they already have admitted, and like there's all these kind of alchemic things that make this uncertain. And I always say like your entire purpose is just to try to like find ways to improve your odds. There's no magic formula. And so if you write a good essay for any school, it will move. It's better, right? And I know that sounds like incredibly basic advice, but that's kind of how I think about it. Um, and so yeah, I guess if your story is written well, Antonio, absolutely you can use that same story for multiple schools as long as it's responsive to the prompt. Obviously, you don't want to you know, respond to two very different prompts with the same story, or else one or both of them might not actually be responsive to the question. Um, so do you think it's okay to use multiple problems uh, as small excerpts instead of going into one or two problems, since not all problems can provide you with depth on multiple aspects of your growth? Um, well, again, I guess it sort of depends on what you mean by multiple. If you have a 700 word essay where you talk about six problems, that's pretty thin soup, right? You're not providing much, especially again since you have to have introduction, conclusion, transitional text, etc. There's just not a lot there, and so what can help is if you feel like those problems aren't substantial enough, have a conversation with someone. And it doesn't have to be someone like me, right? It can be a friend where you say, look, here's the problem that I faced, and dig into it. Really like spend 15 minutes talking about it. What you might discover is that there is more complexity to the problem, and the problem required more of you than what your initial thought of it was. So be specific. Ask yourself, what skills did I need to demonstrate in order to solve the problem? Why was this difficult? How did the problem arise? Was it a recurrent problem that was part of a bigger systemic issue? Like dig into it so that you can start to understand the nature of what it is that you're writing about. That my guess is that in most instances, and it's certainly the case when I work with clients where they say, "Well, there's just this thing I did." It's like, no, let's take a beat and let's talk about this. What will usually happen is that there's more depth and fullness to the problem than they're giving credit for, and that when they explore that, those things will start to come out. And in that process, you can then write about it in a way that's a little bit fuller and realer. Um, what are the striking distance differences between personal statements and the statement of purpose? All right, so this old chestnut. So let me give you the most annoying answer first. Is that it depends. So if, for example, you are I know most people here are MBA applicants, but if you're applying to like another type of master's program or like a PhD or something that's maybe finance related or whatever, um, many schools. So I know, for example, the University of Michigan, for many of its schools, divides, and they'll actually have you do both a personal statement and a statement of purpose. A statement of purpose is designed to be a much drier and more direct, like kind of academic essay. So you say you're interested in exploring whatever academic subject. Describe that subject as you see it, and kind of your relationship with that topic to date. So what have you done working in this area? Have you written about it, worked on it? Have you taken classes on it? What do you think are the most important questions? It is a really deep dive into like that topic. Okay. Now, the one kind of caveat is some schools, just because they want to make things hard, right? Um, they will say statement of purpose when it's functionally a personal statement. And so there's no difference. And so I would read the description. And if a school has both a personal statement and a statement of purpose, then the personal statement part of that will be the stuff that we talked about today. And then your statement of purpose, or sometimes it's called a statement of academic purpose, will be much kind of a drier and more direct academic engagement. And it tilts a little bit more towards like an essay that you might write in college, where you're saying like, whatever, you're writing about quantitative easing. And so you say, okay, like here's what the literature is on it. Here's what I think about it. Here's what I want to explore. Here's what I think the questions are. And here's how your program can help me answer those questions. All right. So it's much less about your personal journey, and it's more like your intellectual journey and your interactions with the topic, and you describe that topic. Okay. Um, uh, let's see. Um, Someone asked a question about a resume. I can answer that real quick. Thank you for that. In what aspect does resume for an MBA application differ from a professional resume? The main thing I will say for all resumes is that you want it to be simple, clean, and scannable. People don't read resumes. They don't. They will scan them. And so when I get these resumes where it's like, 0.65 font or something and it's just packed up, or it's like several pages, that's a big waste of time. Clean it up so that it is one page that is scannable. That's what it is. Because you know how resumes get used? You sit down, and oftentimes this is the first time they're encountering you, and they're scanning it as they're talking to you. Most of the time, that's how it works. And so keep it simple, keep it clear. That's true for both professional contexts and for MBA, right? You don't need the only time that CVs need to be more than one page is usually when you're applying for academic positions. And then you'll have like these, 12-page resumes that list every single thing that you've done. But they just need to be scannable, because if there's too much there, it will defeat the very purpose of it. Okay. The CV is complementary to the rest of your application. This is a quick overview of the things that you've done. And don't go crazy in depth. And so here, all the stuff with the kind of formatting and all of that, it's really important to get that right, so that it can be simple and clear and direct. Okay. All right. I think that is the last of the questions. I want to thank you guys. I've enjoyed speaking with you. If you have further questions as we near the end of our hour, in 90 seconds here, please, check us out at gurufi.com. We focus exclusively on personal statements, helping you revise them or build them from the ground up. And also we have a CV expert on staff who that's all he does. Adam is absolutely great, making your CV shine. All right. I hope you've found this hour informative, and I look forward to seeing you around GMAT Club or at Gurufi. Yeah. Have a great day, guys.